Hope your work week is off to a good start. This is the daily report for February 7th here in Korea. I'm Min-Sun-hee. The Winter Games are well underway over in Beijing amid the presence of Omicron and diplomatic tensions between China and the US. We have more later on the program. Here first is the global pandemic update with our Kwon So-ah. So I hear Korea hit a grim milestone this past weekend.
Right, Sunny. That grim milestone being the 1 million mark in total number of COVID-19 cases here in Korea. A little over 2 years since the first case broke out here in the country. And also this Monday, we're seeing the highest caseload for a Monday with more than 35,200 infections. Now, apart from 155 imported cases, more than 35,100 infections were domestic transmissions. If we take a look at the regional infections here, we've got Gyeonggi-do province at over 9,800. Just a day ago, Gyeonggi-do province hit over 10,000 cases, and Seoul here at close to 7,000 infections. And there's a mix of triple digits and four-digit figures here on this map, as you can see. And in the past 3 straight days, we've been seeing figures surpassing 30,000. And if we compare this figure to last Monday, the figure has more than doubled in the span of a week. And with that, as I said, Korea now has over 1 million total cases of the coronavirus and 6,886 fatalities. However, the number of daily deaths has been on the decline. 13 additional fatalities have been reported in the past day. Now, meanwhile, we've got for the 9th straight day, the number of patients in severe or critical condition has been in the 200s, a slight drop from the day before. Going over to our vaccination figures, not many people have been inoculated over the weekend, as you can see here. But if we go over to our next figure, we do have a little less than 12,000 people who got their additional dose on Sunday. That's now equivalent to almost 55% of the nation's population. And if we take a look at the figures abroad, there seems to be a decline in cases around the world. A little over 1.8 million cases have been posted in the past 24 hours as of noon Korea time, and a little over 6,000 deaths. And that is as we're also seeing many countries do see a decline, like the US, which now has 78 million cases. However, in almost all states, infections have been on the decline, and also similar in the UK, which has now around 50,000 infections. But Germany and France are some European countries that are still seeing more than 100,000 infections in the past day. And those are the general updates that I have for now, but I'll see you back in a bit. Sunny?
All right, so thank you for now. And while we wait for you to get seated, I turn to our Choi Min-jung for more local COVID-19 coverage. Min-jung, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Right, let's begin with details from the emergency meeting presided over by President Moon Jae-in on Korea's COVID-19 situation.
Right, Sunny. On this Monday morning, President Moon Jae-in chaired a virtual meeting of the Central Disaster and Safety Countermeasures headquarters for the first time in 7 months. During the meeting, he emphasized the gravity of our current situation, saying it's difficult to predict how much more infections will spread or when it will reach its peak. He added that while the country needs to remain vigilant, there is no need to panic as long as the public and healthcare workers continue to cooperate. Moon also underlined the importance of our Omicron-tailored medical response, including the roles of local hospitals and clinics.
전파력이 강한 반면 중증 화율이 낮은 오미크론 특성에 맞게 속도와 효율을 높여 고위험군 관리에 역점을 두고 위중증과 사망 위험을 막는 데 역량을 집중해야 할 것입니다. 확진자 수가 증가하더라도 위중증과 치명률이 안정적으로 관리되고 의료 대응 여력을 유지해 나간다면 성공적으로 이 고비를 넘어설 수 있습니다.
Right. Min-jung, meanwhile, do tell us a bit about the prevention guidelines in place at private venues of learning starting today.
Right, Sunny. Starting Monday, venues that do not require the vaccine pass, including cram schools and study cafes, will enforce stronger prevention measures. At places of learning, people must sit 1 seat apart if there are no partitions in between seats to minimize contact as much as possible. There will be a grace period until the 25th, so until then, people won't be fined for violating these rules. The new measures come amid growing concerns over the increasing number of infections among teenagers. Currently, 1 in 4 people people who have contracted the virus are under 20 years old. A closer look at that figure shows that 10% are under the age of 10 and 15% between 10 and 20. Experts have predicted that the number of new cases in this age group could reach 30,000 a day by the end of this month.
Right, 30,000 a day by the end of this month. And because of such predictions, I understand they have prompted Seoul's education officials, SOA, to address containment efforts within the academic arena, right?
Right, Sunny. So Education Minister Yoo Eun-hae just held a briefing on how the Education Ministry is going to deal with these Omicron cases that are rising. And what many parents and students have been asking themselves is whether they can return safe to their new school year, which will kick off in weeks from now. And the gist is, first off, in-person classes will be made available in the next coming weeks, and that goes for elementary, middle, high schools, as well as university students. But what the education minister said is that schools can make their own decisions on whether they want a mix of in-person and online classes, and that depending on the severity of the situation within the schools, if, for instance, they have a certain amount of percentage of kids that have been infected. And also what the minister said is that they will make test kits available at school education facilities because now PCR testing is not as easy as it has been earlier. So they will make those test kits available, as well as more KF masks at schools. And another thing that the minister mentioned is that between February 14th and March 11th, there will be a special prevention period where the schools and education officials will check the prevention situation at education facilities.
Right, I see. And staying with such prevention efforts, Min-jung, aside from places of learning, are there any other changes in our social distancing guidelines starting on this Monday?
Well, it's not much of a change, but social distancing measures have been extended for another 2 weeks starting today. Until the 20th, the social gathering cap will continue to be limited to 6 people, and most businesses like restaurants and cafes will have to close by 9 p.m. Also, starting Friday, department stores and supermarkets won't be allowed, starting Monday that is, department stores and supermarkets won't be allowed to hold promotional events, and eating will also be banned at these locations. Like the new measures implemented for cram schools, as I mentioned earlier, there will be a 3-week grace period. Meanwhile, the age requirement for oral COVID-19 treatment will also be lowered from today. Pfizer's Paxlovid had only been prescribed to those aged 60 and over, but now people in their 50s have also become eligible.
Right, and Min-jung, staying on the treatment front, I understand the government is mobilizing more local clinics to test and treat COVID-19 patients. Tell us more.
That's right, Sunny. Health authorities have designated around 300 more local hospitals and clinics to conduct rapid antigen tests and treat patients. This brings the total number to 780 medical centers nationwide as of Sunday. Combined with the number of respiratory clinics there are a total of around 1,100 hospitals and clinics providing these services nationwide. Although the government is doing its best to expand our medical capacity, there are concerns that the measures are struggling to keep pace with our current surge. As of Monday, close to 146,000 patients are being treated at home. This is 88% of Korea's current capacity, which can handle 166,000 home treatment patients. With the rapid increase in infections, the country's healthcare system faces a difficult task of delivering oral pills and home treatment kits on time and in sufficient numbers.
Right, I see. Min-jung, well, thank you for that report, and I'll see you back on Tuesday.
Thank you.
Right, now for more on the government's assessment of the local Omicron outbreak and of its action plan, I turn back to Soa. What is the latest with regard to our COVID-19 strategy, Soa?
Well, first off, Sunny, there will be a change in the home treatment system. Health Minister Kwon Duk-cheol announced at an earlier briefing today that COVID-19 patients recovering at home will be handled largely in 2 groups, which will be an intensive management group and a regular management group. So those getting intensive care will be seniors aged 60 and above, or those 50 and older who need to be treated with antiviral pills due to existing health conditions or weakened immune systems. Monitoring, including health checks twice a day, will continue for this group, while recovery for the rest of the patients will be based on self-management. Self-treatment kits, meanwhile, will be simplified to include 5 components from the earlier 7 and are to include an oxygen saturation gauge, a thermometer, and fever reducers. Only those who need intensive management will now be eligible to receive the kits, while separate kits for children can be requested by local healthcare centers. This decision has been made taking into regard the less severe symptoms that the majority of Omicron patients are dealing with, to focus on keeping the number of severely or critically ill patients down. Here's more from the health minister.
Our latest prevention measures and the reshuffle in our healthcare response are aimed at lowering the number of serious illnesses and fatalities among high-risk groups through prioritisation and focus. These measures are also absolutely necessary to address the surge in the number of mild patients, and we ask for your understanding and cooperation on this matter.
Right, so and where does that priority on high-risk groups place the rest of the COVID-19 patients outside of that group?
Well, they won't be monitored anymore, and they won't be receiving these recovery kits, that is, but they do have the possibility to receive a virtual consultation from their nearby doctor, and also different cities and municipalities have deployed more extra staff for such tasks. And also what officials are mentioning is that those who are being treated at home have been designated according to their symptoms, which kind of answers the questions on whether it's not too dangerous to leave the major population, let them self-monitor themselves at home. Now, meanwhile, officials also said that they're going to have an extension of outpatient treatment centers. That means also people who are suddenly feeling ill and need emergency treatment, they can go to these facilities, so they're not left alone.
Right. And what is the latest assessment of Korea's Omicron outbreak, which appears to be spreading faster than initially forecast?
Right, Sunny. If you remember back before the Lunar New Year holidays, there were expectations by officials who said that the Omicron would peak at around 30,000 infections. But just recently, we have surpassed that threshold. And that is why KDCA Commissioner Jung Eun-kyung had a more grim forecast for the coming weeks.
According to a forecast by the KDCA, along with a group of local and foreign experts, the highly transmissible Omicron variant could result in anywhere between 130,000 and 170,000 daily cases by the end of February.
Chung said the highly transmissible Omicron variant has been spreading rapidly and accounts for some 92% of COVID-19 cases in the first week of February, after having become the dominant strain in the country in the 3rd week of January. While she noted the downward trend in serious or critical cases and fatalities, she said there is a possibility of a rise in those figures as well that could pressure the medical system, given that Omicron is at least twice as contagious compared to the Delta variant. Although it is a little early to make evaluations on the hospitalization rate of Omicron infections, an official said that currently around 0.4% of cases are severe or critical cases. And as for now, officials say that the medical capacity can handle the number of patients, even if we have around 100,000 cases a day. But as Tong mentioned, we might even have a higher number in the coming weeks.
Right, I see. All right, so thank you for the updates here on the local front. See you on Tuesday.
See you.
Korea has a month left to its presidential election, and it has yet to see a clear favorite among the leading contenders. Now, pundits believe the fate of the race will depend on swing voters and the remaining debates. Our Lee Kyung-won reports.
5 years on from the presidential election of 2017 held early due to the impeachment of then-President Park Geun-hye. That year, the Democratic Party rode to victory on a wave of support for political reform. Now the DP will seek to stay in power and push ahead with its agenda, while the conservative bloc is looking to make a comeback. At this point, the winner is uncertain. Polls suggest around 50% of South Koreans support a change of government. But at the same time, the incumbent President Moon Jae-in has an approval rating above 40%, which is higher than any previous leader when they left office. Plus, there's no candidate with a clear lead. The two frontrunners, Lee Jae-myung of the ruling DP and Yoon Suk-yeol of the main opposition People Power Party, are seeing intensifying competition. Chasing behind them is An Chol-soo of the minor opposition People's Party, but is seemingly showing a decline after hitting 15% at one point. Shim Sang-jung of the Justice Party shows the lowest ratings among the four main candidates. A clue may be found in who people think is more likely to win, as that indicates the general feeling among respondents' families and friends as well. But that's also highly uncertain, having recently shifted in Yoon's favor. Adding to uncertainty are young adults aged 18 to 39 who take up 30% of voters. They're seen as pragmatic voters who lack political allegiances and make their decisions based on their own interests. These young voters are hard to win over, and polls suggest that this age group has the biggest number of undecided voters. There are also centrist voters to consider who show similar tendencies to young voters, having no clear preference towards either the liberal or conservative bloc. In other words, these swing voters will likely to make their decisions based on policies and the candidate's moral issues. And that raises the stakes in the debates. The first televised debate was held last week, and more than 70% of voters say that debates will affect their decision. The figure goes up to 80% for voters in their 20s and 30s. In another survey, 1 out of 4 people actually said they might change their mind after watching the debate. And there will be at least 3 more debates required by law after the candidates are officially registered next week. 이경은 Arirang News.
Right, as our Lee Kyung-eun says, come next week, the candidates will formally register for the presidential race. Now, for more on the formalities ahead as we count down to the March 9th election, here's Kim Do-yeon.
There are now only 30 days to go until South Korea picks its next president. Let's take a look at what's ahead in this short month that'll shape the country's next 5 years. First, in a couple days, local districts will start sending preliminary lists of the voters in their district to the National Election Commission. This is called the completing of the electoral roll. The NEC will start finalizing the list, and during this process, individuals can double-check that they're registered to vote in the right district. The aim is for the NEC to find out how many voters there'll be in each place to prevent election fraud. While this process goes on, the candidates will officially register. That's on the 13th and 14th of this month. Right now, they're only preliminary candidates because the official campaign period doesn't start until the 15th. When it does kick off, they'll be allowed to campaign more loudly and more actively. Candidates and their supporters will go around the country holding rallies, amplified by microphones and loudspeakers. The streets will be lined with posters and banners. Trucks with supporters on board will bring campaign music to every neighborhood, and ads will start to air on TV. About a week into campaigning, the first ballots will be cast, but outside of the country, in 5 days of overseas voting. By the 25th of the month, the Election Commission will have completed its list of domestic voters. Those who can't make it to the polling station in their home district on Election Day will have a chance to cast their ballots elsewhere, even at the airport, if need be, a few days in advance. Otherwise, on Election Day, voters have to go to their designated polling station. Finally, on March 9th, the nation will observe a public holiday, not only to vote for the next president, but also to celebrate the country's democratic process and another peaceful transition of power. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
In other news, North Korea's state-run media has yet to share the outcome of the country's much-anticipated parliamentary session, which was scheduled for this past Sunday. In fact, the silence is sparking quite a bit of speculation. Our North Korean affairs correspondent Kim Da-mi has more.
North Korea is yet to report on its rubber-stamp parliamentary meeting on Sunday, raising speculation that the event could have been delayed or is still ongoing. Pyongyang usually makes an announcement on the results of such sessions the following morning as part of a report on the delegation's visit to Kumsusan Palace of the Sun. That's where the embalmed bodies of the North's previous leaders, Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il, lie in state.
The North had previously made a report a day or two later. The report could also be delayed depending on the content of leader Kim Jong-un's speech, if there is one.
In past meetings, Kim attended with messages for South Korea and the U.S. During last September's session, Kim said the North was restoring inter-Korean communication lines that had been cut off. Despite a possible postponement, experts say the regime will eventually make a report on the latest discussions.
In order to implement the outcome of the meeting in the fields of law and the budget, the North always releases the results to the people.
While pointing out previous cases where the North made an announcement on the final day of the meeting, Seoul's Unification Ministry said on Monday that it will closely monitor the North's moves with a variety of possibilities open. The regime's parliamentary meeting discusses the state budget, new laws, and reshuffles in the leadership. During Sunday's meeting, the North was expected to ratify the direction of the party and state businesses decided at the plenary meeting last December. Kim Da-mi, Arirang News.
On the local front, prices at pumping stations are soaring amid geopolitical tensions and prospects are not looking too bright. Min Soo-kyun has details.
Drivers across the country are fretting over rising costs, wondering how much more they'll have to pay for a litre of fuel today. And that extra amount is throwing their monthly budget out of whack.
Every time the price of oil goes up, it goes up so much. It's a huge burden when looking at the monthly credit card bills.
Gasoline prices remain uncomfortably high despite the country's efforts to ease the upward pressure on costs. In November, the government had temporarily cut fuel taxes by a record 20%, which actually helped drop the average gasoline price nationwide for 9 consecutive weeks. Gasoline prices during that time fell to 1,620 Korean won, that's about $1.35 per litre. But now prices are up again, bouncing back to $1.42 per litre from the third week of January. Experts say it's only a matter of time before gasoline prices hit $1.50 per litre, following a rapid rise in global oil prices. Last Friday, oil surged to a 7-year high, with Brent and WTI crude both rising above $90 a barrel, the 7th straight week of gains.
This is due to concerns that geopolitical instability, including Russia-Ukraine tensions, could lead to disruptions in the supply of crude oil. And if this isn't resolved, oil prices will be high for some time.
The current tax cut on gasoline, diesel, and LPG is scheduled to expire at the end of April. But the government is considering extending the temporary measure for another few months to help people cope with rising costs. Min Soo-kyun, Arirang News.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. Queen Elizabeth II, who at the age of 95 years old celebrated her 70th year on the throne on Sunday as she reviewed plans for her Platinum Jubilee. Not only has she become Britain's longest reigning sovereign, but she's continued to carry out official duties well into her 90s. She became the Queen of Britain and more than a dozen other realms, including Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, on the death of her father, King George VI, on February 6, 1952, while she was in Kenya on an international tour. While this weekend saw low-key events, it'll be a prelude to more ceremonies to mark the Platinum Jubilee in June. Meanwhile, the Queen on Saturday said she wants Prince Charles's wife, Camilla, to be Queen Consort when he becomes king, cementing her place at the heart of the royal family. Charles and Camilla married in 2005 in a civil ceremony in Windsor. Camilla had once been judged as an outsider, but Elizabeth's move now reflects a wider acceptance of Camilla's status as a royal. Costa Ricans headed to the polls on Sunday to cast their votes for the next president. Only this time, they have a record 25 presidential candidates to choose from. With a record number of candidates, none of them are expected to win more than 40% of the votes, the threshold needed to avoid a runoff. The election is likely to see a second-round vote in early April. The latest race is to replace center-left President Carlos Alvarado. While polls say about one-third of the voters in the Central American nation are unsure about who to vote for, they do want their next leader to tackle corruption and high unemployment rates as a priority during the four-year term. At least 3 people were killed in southeastern Madagascar on Sunday after cyclone Shuai made landfall, leaving a trail of devastation. Authorities say roads were flooded and houses were submerged. This comes as Shuai swept inland late Saturday with heavy rain and wind speeds of 165 kilometers per hour. The latest storm follows Cyclone Anna, which hit the island just 2 weeks ago, killing 55 people and displacing 130,000 people. The IOC said Sunday it will proceed with a meeting with former world #1 doubles tennis player Peng Shuai during the Beijing Winter Games. However, the IOC did not give further details of the meeting. This comes as the well-being of the Chinese star became a matter of concern in November when she appeared to allege on social media that a former Chinese vice premier had sexually assaulted her in the past. The IOC has stated that it would support her if she wanted her allegations to be investigated. However, Peng said in December that she had never accused anyone and that the post she made had been misunderstood. 이승재, Arirang News.
Coffee prices are on the rise and pundits say the pandemic has played a role. For more on the causes and consequences of this climb in coffee costs, we bring you this report.
Starbucks, the largest coffee chain in Korea by sales, announced a price hike on most of its products coming into effect in mid-January. Other franchise coffee chains have also followed suit in charging more for their menu items, while the prices of instant and canned coffee products have also risen in tandem. The global price of coffee rose more than that of any other commodity in 2021, fueled by unfavorable weather and global supply chain disruptions. According to data by the International Coffee Organization, global coffee prices nearly doubled in the past year, en route to their highest level in around a decade.
The first is that we had a big frost in Brazil, which is the world's largest coffee producing country. And that will reduce supply for next couple of years. And the second is exactly COVID and problems with logistics and ports. Everything is taking much longer to go from the origins to the consuming destinations.
The pandemic-fueled recession has been hard on many small business owners in Korea. Yet the number of cafes nationwide has continued to grow despite COVID-19, with low entry barriers and capital requirements, drawing fresh players into the industry. Compared to January of 2020, in the early days of COVID-19, the number of cafes in Korea has risen by more than 30% as of November 2021.
사람들이 그냥 행어라운드 하면서 많은 시간을 보내면서 거기서 일도 하고 넷플릭스도 보고 이런 그 라이프스타일 변화가 또 이런 커피숍의 증가와 커피에 대한 수요의 증가에 한 몫을 하고 있다 이렇게 생각합니다.
The rising price of coffee beans has posed a serious dilemma to many cafe owners in Korea. This is especially true for smaller neighborhood cafe owners, for whom a price hike is a much more difficult choice to make compared to larger franchise coffee chains.
가격을 올리고 싶은데 주변에 다른 카페들도 많고 약간 올리는 거에 대해서 민감하다 보니까 저희가 눈치를 보고 있어요. 근데다가 단골 손님들 같은 경우에는 지금 100원 올리는 것도 되게 민감하기 때문에 저희 쪽에서는 좀 많이 부담으로 생각이 듭니다.
Similarly, budget coffee chains that target price-sensitive coffee drinkers are also finding it difficult to simply raise their prices. Instead, some of these chains have opted to cut costs rather than charging their customers more by operating more unmanned stores.
저가 커피를 이용하시다가 고가를 이용하시지는 않으시거든요. 근데 이제 고가를 이용하시다가 저가 브랜드들의 품질이 양호하다면 저가로 갈아타실 수 있기 때문에 인건비에 대한 부분을 좀 줄이려고 로봇 바리스타를 준비를 해왔습니다. 그러면 아무래도 매출의 한 30% 정도 차지하는 인건비가 어느 정도는 이제 제로가 되기 때문에 그런 부분으로 해서 전체적으로 수익이 안정적으로 나오게끔 계속 노력을 하고 있습니다.
It is no secret that Koreans love their coffee like few others do across the world. Data shows that Korean adults drink an average of 350 cups of coffee a year, nearly triple the global average. Korea's love affair with coffee has continued in spite of the pandemic, with the country importing a record amount of coffee beans in the year 2020. According to experts, coffee demand is expected to remain strong in the coming years, despite the rising price of coffee beans and coffee products.
이제 생활 필수품으로의 또는 그런 기능이 하나 있기 때문에 가격을 내린다고 수요가 줄지 않는다라고 생각하고요. 일단은 커피 전문점의 그 공간을 활용해서 제3의 장소라는 그런 개념을 가지고 도시인들이 거기서 쉬고 일하는 그런 공간으로 인식한다면 커피 가격 인상이 곧 수요 감소로 이어지지 않을 것이다 이렇게 보고 있습니다.
With coffee consumption still rising amid global supply chain disruptions, coffee drinkers here in Korea may continue to feel the sting of more expensive cups of morning brew for the time being.
The Beijing Winter Games have begun despite the diplomatic hurdles posed by boycotts by several Western leaders. For more on this reality and the repercussions, I have Professor Kim Hyun-wook from the Korean National Diplomatic Academy. It's good to have you back, Professor Kim.
Thank you.
I also have Professor Chung Koo-yeon from Gangwon National University. It's a pleasure to have you here, Professor Chung.
Thank you for having me here.
Right, Professor Kim, let's begin then with a few words on the importance of sports in promoting diplomacy.
Sports events has been very important roles historically in dealing with the one country's diplomatic or political interests. Maybe some governments, especially, the example might be ping pong diplomacy in 1971 by President Nixon of the United States. The U.S. tried to use the ping pong sports as an important tool to normalize its relationship with China. But sports events itself can be also a very important critical juncture. The event, I think, example is 2008 Beijing Olympic, after which the rise of China became very much evident compared to the Western countries and United States, which have devastated its economy after the financial crisis. So I'm not sure what this Beijing Olympic will have a role, but I think China will try to use this event as a tool to upgrade its reputation globally, I think, rather than using it for some purposes diplomatically.
Right. And keeping in mind what Professor Kim has said, then Professor Chung, do you believe that China looks to gain diplomatic from its latest hosting of this global sporting event?
Well, for the last 2 years, it has not been that great for China because of the COVID-19 pandemics, as well as confrontation, wolf warrior diplomacy, which tainted Chinese, national image as well as reputation. So this event was pretty critical for Xi Jinping to upgrade his image as well as to be welcomed as international stakeholders. But as you can, and also domestically, this event was pretty important because Xi Jinping is starting his third term this fall, which consolidates power as an independent ruler, whose power has been pretty less centralized since the reign of Mao Zedong. So this was pretty critical domestically and internationally. But as you mentioned about diplomatic boycott, the number of national leaders who actually joined this event was kind of less than expected. So in that sense, China has not been fully accomplished its goal, especially diplomatic goal. But what remains is how you actually carry out the rest of the games and how they treat foreigners in the territory of China.
Right. And now for a glimpse of the general atmosphere in the mainland as Beijing plays host to the Winter Games amid a pandemic and a diplomatic boycott led by the Biden administration, I turn to Fabian Kretschmer, who is currently over in China. Fabian, welcome back.
Hello from Beijing.
Right, Fabian, what are the implications of hosting the Winter Games for Beijing as compared to its earlier hosting of the Summer Games back in 2008 that Professor Kim also mentioned?
Yeah, I think the significance is that now Beijing is the first host to the first city to host both a Summer Olympic and now a Winter Olympic. That's quite an achievement. And if you ask people on the street, then they are really proud of it and feel some patriotic pride. But that being said, compared to the 2008 Olympics, at that time there was a big Olympic fever. People were really excited, and also the population and the government was much more open to the world, I would say. Now there's not really much to feel from that. I mean, people are not so emotionally moved by the Winter Olympics. Of course, also because China is not a traditional winter sport land, but also because because of the pandemic, the Winter Games take place behind a loop, basically behind fences. So it's really separate from the population. So even here from Beijing, it feels a little bit far away.
Right. And Fabien, what appears to be the general public view, perhaps, with regard to the absence of diplomatic delegations from the US, the UK, and other Western countries to the Winter Games?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, because it's not really, as you might expect, that it's a big topic, this diplomatic boycott here within the mainland, because most of the state-controlled media, I mean, they do cover it very much on the side. They don't really mention it that much. And if so, then they dismiss it as a political grandstanding, as a kind of politicization of a sports, and it's not really that much discussed. I mean, that's a stark contrast. For example, if you look at Western media, especially US media, they are full of basically political stories. You don't even get the impression that it's a sport event, but they only talk about the diplomatic boycott. So it's really two different worlds.
Right. And back here in the studio, Professor Kim, simply speaking, what have been the ripple effects of the Biden administration's diplomatic boycott of the Beijing Games?
I don't think it was really successful. Maybe compared to the United States, for example, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, the U.S. position, hegemonic position now is pretty much less than that. Maybe I think 10 or 15 countries, only 10 or 15 countries participated in the Beijing Olympic boycott. So I think maybe the U.S. hegemonic capability has been lessened. The Chinese economic influence on other countries and international community has been pretty much widespread. So trying to use this Olympic and boycotting this Olympic by the United States, I don't think was really successful.
Right. And Professor Zhang, do you see the latest diplomatic developments amid the Winter Games as perhaps ushering in a fresh chapter of geopolitical tensions with China and Russia perhaps on one side and the US and its allies on the other?
Yes, actually Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping held a summit ahead of Olympic Games, and they produced the joint statements which was pretty interesting, that China criticized the United States as a representative of minority in the world community, and Russia also criticized the United States for not encouraging European countries to join NATO. So they are showing this strategic alignment between two countries, and they are confronting the United States hegemony, as Professor Kim mentions, is declining hegemony. So afterwards, well, this Olympic was not that critical, but after this Olympic Games, now they are facing more confrontation, great power politics, and U.S. need to garner more support from their allies and partners.
Right. And meanwhile, Fabian, yet another challenge the current Games over in Beijing is the spread of Omicron. Having said that, what is the latest on that front, Fabian?
Well, even before the games started, they detected 300 cases, not only among the people who arrived from the airport, but also from the people who were already inside the bubble. And that includes, of course, some journalists, some team coaches, but also athletes themselves. However, I would still argue that the bubble works so far. I've seen the safety concept with my own eyes. It is really strict. There's a daily nucleic testing. The staff mostly wears like hazmat suits or protective gear. The movement is quite restricted, and all the venues are really walled off. I mean, there are fences, there are security cameras and personnel that prevent the athletes and everyone inside the bubble really to have contact with the rest of the population. So from an epidemiological point of view, I think it is quite strict, and it has prevented a big infection cluster of the virus from spreading so far.
Right, that is reassuring to know. Fabian, has there been any efforts to perhaps address quite a bit of talk about the quality of food at the Olympics, as well as perhaps the wind chill factor, is it, that the athletes from Europe were not really expecting?
The quality of the food?
Yes.
Well, I mean, I've seen the menu, so the cards of the people, what they order. I mean, it's quite disappointing because you have I mean, Beijing is a great food city. You have the best restaurants here, and really, I mean, the Chinese cuisine is quite diverse. But what you can get inside the bubble has been very underwhelming, to say the least. And I mean, also, it sounds trivial, but even for a small can of Chinese local beer that is for 8 kwai, so maybe I don't know, Chon Obek won in Korean currency, you pay 10 times as much in the bubble. So I heard a lot of complaints about that.
Right. Fabian, one final question before you leave us. What can you share with us now about the protocols in place with regard to media coverage of the games there?
Well, I mean, there have been a lot of issues. I mean, just during the ceremony for foreign reporters who put their tripod on the street and did some live shots or asked some people, they were prevented from security personnel. And because it happens during the Olympics, it gets a lot of attention, but that's our daily business here. I mean, if you look foreign, if you have a camera and go to the street and ask people, it will not take more than 10 minutes until you have some kind of unwanted attention. So, yeah, it's quite sad.
Right, I see. All right, Fabian, thank you very much for the latest on the Winter Games over in China.
Thank you.
Right, back here in the studio then, Professor Chang, what looks to be the impact of tensions between China and the US, perhaps on matters here on the Korean Peninsula?
Well, as I mentioned, the great power politics between U.S. and one side and the other sides in Russia and China. Now, U.S. has less time to focus on South Korea and Korean Peninsula issue. And also, as you mentioned, the Ukraine crisis is coming up, and it's kind of a matter of time, and it's not a matter of how. So, United States now need to focus more on, European theater at the same time, this Indo-Pacific theater. So, United States have more kind of priority and more assets to focus on this Indo-Pacific, especially on the Korean Peninsula issue.
Right, and Professor Kim, I extend the same question to you. Staying on the Korean Peninsula, what are your prospects with regard to matters here in the country, on the peninsula that is, after the Winter Games?
I think this is, we have to take a look at from a broader perspective. I think after, Trump's gone, Biden came in, and, I don't think North Korea is ready to jump into the working level talk with Biden. Working level talk, very long, tedious, and burdensome process for North Korea. I don't think North Korea can accept all these kinds of working level talk with the United States. Maybe that's why I think North Korea requested some preconditions from the United States, but it didn't work. So maybe I think after North Korea's request was not accepted by the Biden government, North Korea is continuing developing its defense capabilities. So I think this is something that would continue in the future. But more important thing is that the U.S.-China rivalry is getting fierce, and North Korea is leaning towards China rather than leaning towards the United States, which means that I think recently we'll have a trilateral meeting with Japan and the United States in Hawaii, which I think the U.S. is trying to bolster trilateral, mechanism in the current, set of the Korean Peninsula situations. So it will be pretty much, China camp and U.S. camp rivalry, I think will be something that will happen more in the future.
Do you also foresee then future or furthermore test launches of missiles by North Korea as it seeks to secure leverages it for talks with
I think
Washington?
so. I think so. Now North Korea continues to test fights, missiles, and I think in April, after the new government came in South Korea, and maybe possibly the joint military exercises will happen. I think possibly North Korea can shoot the ICBMs, and also even that case, I think China will still be on the side of North Korea.
Right. And against this climate of affairs, Professor Chung, in what direction do you believe should Korea seek to plot its diplomatic course, should I say? I understand this is a difficult question, though.
Well, it's very difficult questions, but I think South Korea confront two difficult challenges. And the first one is the North Korea and maintain stability of Korean Peninsula in the first place. This government, Moon administration, has been focused on maintaining stability and further initiate this peace initiative during his term, but it was not that successful. Still, North Korea is developing nuclear weapons and testing missiles. So it's pretty important to prioritize maintaining stability on the Korean Peninsula in the first place. The second challenge is the Indo-Pacific and great power politics. We are located in the Korean Peninsula, but at the same time, we are in the Indo-Pacific theater. So given that great power politics are kind of intensifies, that this Korean Peninsula issue will be located within this power politics issue. So we need to figure out how we can navigate this power politics and conflict at the same time increasing our strategic value of our country.
Right. And staying with that, Professor Chung, do you believe that Korea or the Moon administration so far has been navigating the waters or balancing tensions between Beijing and Washington in a productive manner?
Well, it's pretty tough, choices and tough strategies. And this great power politics has been in the making during the last 4 years. And now we are seeing actual this politics in different camps, Russia and China, United States and its allies. So we have to be find our own visions and what kind of country South Korea wants to be for the last long-term great power politics. Also at the same time, how we can deal with North Korea issue, maintain stability. So that's kind of difficult questions. And we have elections. And so after 30 days, we might have different administrations, so we might have to chart another national strategy.
Right. And Professor Kim, do you see Seoul's decision perhaps to send or dispatch a diplomatic delegation to the Beijing Winter Games as perhaps affecting its future ties with Washington?
I don't really think so. Only that one event would not determine the relationship with the United States. Things has been pretty much happened long time. I mean, the South Korea has been very much hesitant between U.S. and China for a long time, not very active in the Indo-Pacific of the United States for a long time. So I don't think this Winter Game, Beijing Olympic thing only would determine U.S. perception about South Korea. More important thing we have to do for now is we have to think about what our relationship with China would be in the future. Let's assume the U.S. is not here. Let's assume that there's no U.S.-South Korea alliance. What will be the relationship between China and South Korea? I mean, we have to look at what happened in the history. I mean, there was no autonomy from China historically. So are we going to have the same posture toward China in the future, even though there's no United States here in the Korean Peninsula? I don't think we'll accept that if we don't hold the autonomy from China. We need to have a strategic autonomy from China. That's something we have to think about. Whether it's rather than it should be U.S. or China, some kind of a choice-driven foreign policy. I think a more important fundamental question is what is going to be our relationship with China in the future.
Right. And staying with our relationship with China, Professor Chung, there's been quite a bit of heated accusations here in South Korea of cultural appropriation by China after a performer wearing hanbok appeared during the opening ceremony of the Winter Games. How do you respond?
Well, the scene we have actually watched through the parade was that there are 55 ethnic minorities and they are kind of respected. Chinese governments are trying to show that it respect and cherish the cultural heritage of these 55 ethnic minorities. So in that context, we cannot, easily accuse or criticize Chinese motivation. But in the long term, I think more fundamental way, we have to look at what China wants to achieve from Chinese this cultural processes. And this is not just one event. We have watched a number of events in the past, and it has been pretty long time we have watched this press. So we have to ask how far we have been prepared in the first place, and what Chinese actually wants from this cultural process. That's the kind of question we have to ask. And for that ends, I think what we have to do is look at our kind of, like, for instance, like academia. We have to work on our Korean studies. Also, public diplomacy effort should be more strengthened to let a world or community knows about our cultural heritage and our soft power.
Right. And Professor Kim, I address the same question to you. What are your thoughts on allegations here in the country with regard to cultural appropriation by neighboring China?
Well, this is something that is related to what I have mentioned before. I mean, China is rising. China is becoming a big power, bigger power than before. And I think definitely China will take a look at South Korea, the Korean Peninsula per se, as the one that has been before. I mean, we have been the country that has been providing tribute to Chinese, dynasties all the time. So these kinds of, strategic dependency on China, maybe economically, culturally, maybe many aspects will happen. So this is something that we have to be ready. I mean, if there is some kind of request by China that is inappropriate, are we ready to revert back to Chinese request? I mean, sometimes we are afraid of Chinese, economic coercion. So if that would be the case, then we have to be ready for the economic coercion. We have to diversify our markets and diplomacy so that we can hold up our strategic autonomy from China. So that's long-term game, but I think we have to be ready for it.
Right, and hopefully the new administration will work to do so. All right, Professor Kim, as always, thank you very much for your insights. Professor Chung, thank you very much for being with us here today. Right, well, that brings us to the end of this edition of the Daily Report. Do join us again same time tomorrow. That would be Tuesday. Thank you for now.
저는 메이저리그보다 태극마크를 단 마운드가 더 자랑스럽습니다. 내가 대한민국이다 라는 자부심이죠. 재외선거도 마찬가지죠. 대한민국의 내일을 내가 만들어 간다는 거 멋지지 않나요? 마치 가슴에 태극마크처럼 대외 유권자 여러분, 전 세계 어디서나 소중한 한 표 꼭 행사해 주세요. 여러분의 한 표가 바로 대한민국의 태극마크입니다. 아름다운 선거, 행복한 대한민국. 중앙선거관리위원회.
When the lantern of wisdom and mercy lights up, a traditional cultural festival unfolds. All hearts connect as one. The wave of traditional lanterns that light up the heart and the world flows. Joy overflows as people experience events, performances where people come together in harmony. When flowers fall like rain on the world, illuminated with wisdom and mercy, we all become one. And happiness flows as we hold each other's hands. Welcome to Lotus Lantern Festival, Seoul, Korea.